What's going on, YouTube family? It's Dustin Valkema, and welcome back to the second video in this small workshop on creating a cool image in Photoshop. Today, we're just going to be working a little bit further through the process of finalizing some of the effects and initial prep for grading. So I'm looking forward to explaining some of the bits of my process with you guys on this. And then in the third video, we'll actually get to grading in Lightroom and making this image look better as a final product. Thanks for being here. Let's get started. In looking at the image now, I really like where it's going, but I do have a couple things that I'd like to really kind of help make stand out in the image. So what I'll do is we'll just do another paint over here, so we can go over a couple things. So what I don't like is the way that the light is hitting the vehicle here. And that's primarily because it's a very unrealistic spot for the light to be going on. That's where it's reflecting the sun, and the sun is now casting a shadow over here to the right. And so we'll want to make sure that we clean that up a bit. And we'll also want to have a reflection that's happening here in the hood. And so that reflection from the hood, even, the rest of the vehicle here, even if it's just light, more light kind of bouncing around in this area, that's going to be really important to selling the effects of the lightning coming down, because that would really, be realistic. I want the subjects here to have a little bit more blue maybe around them. And let's get rid of that. Let's see here. Want to make sure that we can get, just a little bit more blue around them to kind of help that focal point stand out quite a bit more. And then I am going to want quite a bit more, maybe exposure. I'm not sure exactly how I want to do it, but I want to have a little bit more of a light source that's actually hitting them here, so that they really stand out a bit more from the image, because this is quite bright up here. And once I get into grading and cropping in Lightroom, I may just crop this top part out of the photo anyways, just to center, just pour more or put more of a center composition at play, so that you don't have it, so tall. I don't really think it's needed. We could crop in something here like this even, and it would be perfectly fine. So looking at the arm here, we will want to add a little bit more of a light source, or just cast light, especially in these areas. Maybe not so much on this outside piece, but just where the light from the lightning and energy would be hitting there. And then right in his glasses, we are going to want a little bit more of some kind of a light source or reflection that's really pushing in that area there. And that would, I'm hoping to just be able to pull like a snapshot of all of these layers and then put them in like a screen overlay just on top of the vehicle here, and then into his glasses, to see if we can push that a little bit further without too much hassle. So the other thing that I do see here is that we have a little bit too much ground. And I think we'll actually handle this part of it once we get to grading in Lightroom. But what I think we'll do is we'll just create a gradient. Let's see if I can just pull this in here. And what we'll do is we'll just create a gradient, and we'll kind of have that sitting down, which will just drop the exposure. We can just mimic that with a soft light here. And we'll just slightly hide, the bottom plane there just a little bit, so that it pulls even more focus away from the actual ground there and more onto our subjects. And I really like to do these type of paint overs, and just kind of analyzing my images as I'm working on them. And typically it's not something that I would put in a video like this, but I think that it's important for you guys just to kind of understand the process of things that I might do on the fly, to sort of self-critique and some kind of an analysis that happens when, you know, I'm working in the creative process. So we'll delete this gradient. And what I will do is we can go in the effects. We actually don't need the effects layer right now, but we will head back into channels, and then we have this subjects alpha that we had from before. So we'll just Command or Control, click our subjects, and then that just makes a selection. We'll move into, not layer mask, we will move into, say, a curves adjustment. So what we can do here is just pop them a little bit more. And what I'm looking for is hopefully just a little bit more of a contrast pop to their top side without creating too much of an offset down here on the bottom. And we can actually paint out from this mask, so I'm not too worried about it. And if you press, let's see here, if you press Alt 4, Alt 5, so 3, 4, 5 will go right through your RGB color channels for your curves. So that's just the Alt key. 2 is just your regular RGB curve, and then 3 is your red, 4 is your green, 5 is your blue. So what we'll do is we'll work in the blue here just to push a little bit more of a blue hue right onto these two. And we'll make sure that that's just not too far into the shadows, but just enough to give kind of a nice blue pop there. And we can do the same thing with green. Let's see if we add just a little bit of green, we can head back into blue. We don't really want that to be too much. So see what that looks like here. So I think that's actually a little bit too far. So we'll head back to our RGB curves. We can bring this down just a little bit. And then what we'll do is in the layer mask, we'll press B for the brush tool. And with a black brush, our opacity is actually fine, but we'll just paint that right out of the bottom here. And right out of the bottom portions of them that might not be getting hit by this light anyways. So you can see that that's really just more of a contrast popping adjustment there. I do think we need to head right back into the blue channel actually and pull it down on those highlights so that it's not quite so harsh. And at the end of the day, we can just drop the opacity some. So I think we just want to drop the opacity here. I like the effect that it's giving, but I just don't like the way that it's, let's see here. Yeah, I think it was just a little bit too much. And so we'll let that sit there. So like I said before, when we were doing the overlay, I do want to have a little bit more of like a glow behind them. And I will save that for a little bit further along in the process once we get to adding a little bit more, maybe lighting effects. We'll add some more smoke here. I think that we should do maybe a little bit more of like a detailed smoke. This is very atmospheric right now, but I think that we could push the detail and enhance things a little bit to sort of match the same kind of style or energy that we have coming from the lightning or energy strike that's happening here. So from this point, what we'll start off with is seeing if we can get some of these effects to start reflecting in the vehicle here. And so what I'll want to do is move all the way down to the base image again and just sort of prep that. So to do that, we'll double click this smart object to open this up in its own document here. And then we can see the specular highlight, the reflection here that's happening from the sun. And so what I'll do is, let's see, we can actually just, we'll duplicate this background layer. And I think we can get away with, I mean, that's fairly easy there. So we'll just grab a patch tool. We'll just remove this highlight. It doesn't have to be perfect because this isn't anything nearly close to a focal point. So what we'll do is we'll just start to remove some of these. try to get these to match the light source that we know will need to be in the image in the end of this. So I'll just grab most of these specular hits here and just try to get rid of them the best I can in the most believable way possible without putting too much time into actually painting them out and making sure it all looks perfect. It's typically fairly easy to fake this kind of stuff if you're not focused on perfection, especially when it's not the focal point of the image. So we'll remove this big one here. Move that down. It's actually fine. I'm just going to leave that. These spots here on the wheels, we'll take care of those. So this is actually where you can see the chromatic aberration really shining through. So primarily what I'm doing here is trying to find areas when I'm using the patch tool that have the same luminance. Because if you don't have the same luminance, then you start to get some really weird and funky artifacts to where you can almost see here that it, certain parts of this will turn black. Or if you're in a light area, say a dark area will go to white and just create some really weird and funky patterns. So at this point, what I really think might be the easiest way to go about this is if we just grab the clone stamp and we can set our mode here in the menu panel. If we just set the mode to darken, we turn off aligned, we'll see if we can darken this down without much problem. Nope, that's actually going to take too much there. Alrighty, so next thing, sometimes it's not always perfect. A lot of times when I'm going through this kind of stuff, I'll try things that I think might work best, and they don't. So if we just grab a curves adjustment layer, and we go ahead and drop the exposure here, we'll see if we can just paint this in without having too much of an issue. No, luminosity doesn't look good either. Alrighty, so I will press Control or Command I to invert this layer mask with that selected. Then I'll grab my brush tool, a white brush, opacity we can set to maybe 30%. And from here we just want to lightly paint over this area now that we have that curves adjustment on. This is really more, sort of a slap comp way of going about it. There are various methods that you can use to darken things down, but right now I'm not really too concerned with that overall. Just want to make sure that it can, get darkened down just a little bit. And then if we need to come back to it later, we can. But since it's not a focal point, I really don't want to concern myself too much with it. So the next thing here is having some kind of a light source that would be hitting the top of the vehicle. And so a fairly easy way to do this is to just create a curves layer, and we can bring that exposure up quite a ways. And then we can press Control or Command I again with this layer mask selected, and then that inverts it. So with a white brush, we can actually paint here now on these parts of the vehicle, and that should really make this area pop. And so that's the area that we would have that primary light source hitting it. Make sure that we don't get anything on the outside there that way. So what this is doing is just kind of setting a base for where that reflection would actually happen. And I don't think that it will hurt too bad to have it can be messy. I think that if we really need to go back and, did not want to press the crop tool. So I think that if we need to go back to this later, we can. So I'll flip to a black brush and we'll just kind of brush some of this area out here. maybe go back to that other curves and just darken down the side of this vehicle so that it's really not in focus. We can do the same thing and darken everything right around the ground here. And the same with the background. I don't think the background shows up too much, but once we darken this area down this way, it really puts a little bit more emphasis directly on the top of the vehicle where we should have that light hitting. And so we can do the same thing on this side and just do some rough brushing. Hopefully this doesn't come back to bite me. Sometimes it's very rare that I actually do things this dirty, but I'm really trying to focus a little bit more these days on just making something that looks cool versus spending 8 to 10 hours for a commercial level composite when I don't need to. So we'll see how long this actually takes us in the in the end of it. I'm sure that the more comfortable I get talking through my processes and things, the faster we'll be able to just do these workshop style images or these workshop style videos and get through them much quicker. So I will just press Command or Control S to save this smart object. And then that's going to open or be updated in our main comp automatically. All right, now that that's done saving, we can move back into our main comp, and you can see here sort of what we did. We just darkened down the side of this vehicle here so it's not so prominent, as well as the right side of the image here. And this little bit of light that we painted on the top of the vehicle should really help now once we go to see if we can distill these effects and then create reflections. So what I'll do is I will press Control or Command with Alt or Option, Shift, and E, and that's going to merge everything down into, it's just merging all of the visible layers into a single image here at the top. And then what I can do is copy this down. Let's see, we can just go to screen maybe, and then grab that image and see if we can move that. Let's go to do soft light. Let's see if soft light will work. So what we'll do is we'll just skew this image a little bit. So how I'm doing this is just pressing Control or Command and then clicking one of these corner anchor points on the free transform. And we're just going to warp that around. And it doesn't need to be too crazy. Maybe we'll flip the image horizontal, which means we can warp that the other way. Just see if we can get that to work well with the way that the vehicle is actually positioned here. This isn't something that we really need to have perfect, and we can blur this out, but it's just having a little bit of that effect there that I think will really help us in the end of this. So we'll just press Enter to apply that. And then let's see here. I'm not sure. I really think we can get away. Color dodge might actually work well for this. So if we press Alt or Option and then create a layer mask here, it's going to just create a black layer mask. And we can grab a white brush with the layer mask selected. And even with a low opacity, we can just go in here and paint some of this in. Really don't like that color dodge. I'm trying to use it, guys. It's one of those effects, or one of those blend modes that I don't use very often. And there's typically a reason for that. I feel like it just oversaturates the colors in most cases. For what I'm using, there's certain areas that I'll use it, but this typically isn't one of those. But I do like the way, that soft light works, so we can try that. So we'll just paint this in here with soft light, and we'll see. I don't know if we can do a blend if at all with this. Let's see if blend if works. So what I'm looking for here is to see if, even just without painting, if I can remove parts of, say, this hood scoop, if I can just take the reflection out of the areas that I don't need it to be in there. So I'm just cranking these values. And again, the way that I'm doing this is holding Alt Option and then just dragging out the side of these handles here. So I'll click OK there. Take a look at our layer mask by Alt Option clicking the layer mask thumbnail here. And what I'll do is I'll just grab the dodge tool here quickly and just paint this in really rough, just to make sure that that's white, so that I can see that showing up a little bit better. And it's okay for this one here to be dirty. I really don't need it to be perfect. And so let's see, what I can do is just grab a black brush and set the opacity to 100. And then we'll just paint this out of here. A little bit harder over brush. So I think at this point what we might be able to do here is just, I'm not even concerned with working destructive at this point. But what I'll do, I don't really like the angle that that's sitting at, and so I will just Control or Command drag these around here a little bit to see if we can get sort of a better position here on the vehicle. And that works for me. Let's blur this out a little bit. So we'll just go to Blur, Gaussian Blur, not 173 pixels. It's pretty high. Let's find something decent so that it's sort of out of focus, but really not creating too much of a problem. Sure, that works. There's still something that I don't really like about the way that the reflections are hitting here. So hard light works, but in this case it's actually doing something very similar to what the color dodge is doing. But I really like the way that the color dodge kind of pops there. So I will just press Control or Command and U and then desaturate this just a little bit here. And then maybe we can just take that down just a little bit. Transform it again. You can hold Alt or Option and adjust the little axis point here. And so what I'll do is just scale this at this point. And if you press Alt or Option while you're scaling, it will scale from both sides instead of just scaling the one side out. So I think we do need to go a little bit smaller here. I really don't want to concern myself too much or spend really any more time with this than I need to. So what I'll do here is I'll just go through and paint some of this out. I think that we can hide a lot of, the color differences and stuff here when we get to grading. Might not even be too big of a deal. So we'll just bring some of this back a little bit. We'll just call that done. Like I said, I still might actually just remove the car. I have no idea. But moving along here, what I want to do at this point, now that we have some of this set, is name this. We'll just say car reflection. And then we'll open up Bridge so that we can grab a couple more effects. Alrighty, so now we're in Bridge, and I think for this image, I know that I want to have some kind of like a debris flying, maybe something just sort of blurred to show some sort of movement. And so I'll look through these images here, see if I can find any of this stock that I think that might work really well for this specific scenario. Let's see here. I don't really want anything too large if we can help it, but maybe just something to show, you know, that there's a little bit more going on right around them than just, here, maybe this will work. We want to show that there's a little bit more going on around them than just having this one, you know, piece of lightning coming from the sky. So what we'll do is we'll scale that down. We'll try a screen blend mode, see if this works, or see how this works here. Initially, what I'm actually thinking we should do is delete this guy. And if we go through any of these other sort of debris, this is actually a bunch of sawdust that I shot. And I really like the effects that it can give. It's a little bit chunkier, almost like it's, you know, dirt or something like that flying. So what we'll do is we'll just find one, pick one, anyone, this one here. So what we'll do is we'll grab, you know, this piece of chunky debris, and I think that we'll need to rotate this actually so that it's lit a little bit more close to what we have in the scene, and just sort of match the light direction a little bit better. And so if I want to create some kind of maybe like a darker debris, if we set this to screen right now, you can see that it's just going to create a bunch of, you know, very light and airy type of debris. But if we want it to be maybe a little bit more of like an ash, then what we can do is just invert this, and that turns it blue. But then we can go into Controller Command U. Let me change this back to normal. Go to Controller Command U to bring up hue saturation, and then we can just bring the saturation down a bit, and we can move over to a little bit more of, say, a red brown, like kind of a more of like a dirt looking effect here. So we actually don't need our saturation to be up too high. So that looks good. We can also press Controller Command M to get into our curves. And this is all actually just being done on a smart object so that we can always go back and change this later on with smart filters. So what I'm looking at right now while I'm adjusting this is just a little bit of the JPEGing that we are getting here on the edges. And that's just because we're pushing certain values, maybe a little bit more than what they need to be. There are a lot of midtones in there, so we just have to be careful with that. So we'll set this blend mode to multiply. And you can immediately see here now that it no longer looks like sawdust. It looks a little bit more like, you know, some kind of a dirt or, you know, or debris particles. So we can bring this right under our effects layer so that, or sorry, our effects group. And so that will actually be right underneath our lightning so that that's not really getting in the way of anything. And I don't think that we'll want this on our subjects. We can address that in a minute. We're going to scale this down some here. Now hold shift and sort of scale that up. I think I want that to be a little bit more of a vertical debris anyways. And this is just the first layer. Sometimes it really helps to go and add, you know, say multiple layers these effects to really give more of a depth to it. So foreground, midground, background, all of that stuff can be done fairly easily with, say, just 3 of these particle layers with a depth of field to them or anything like that. And what we do want is we want to take this off of our subjects first, just to make sure that there's not too much going on. So I'll press Alt or Option and Control or Command, and I will just drag this layer mask from our curves here up onto that action debris. So when that loads there, and you can see that it's currently on them, that's because they're set to white. I will just press Control or Command I, and that will invert it. So now you can see that it's off of their face here for the most part. If I press Alt or Option and hold that layer mask, you can see that it's still going to be getting them a little bit more, say, below the shoulders. And we can paint some of that out here. So we'll just grab a black brush and make sure that our pen pressure sensitivity is on. And then we can just paint some of that out from, directly on top of them. And this doesn't need to be too crazy, but painting it this way actually, gives you a little bit of leeway to work with some of the atmospheric perspective or just the atmosphere in general without, having to drop the opacity and do different things. Sometimes it's nice just to be able to paint it like this fairly quick, and you can just add some atmospheric depth to this without having to do too much. And so that's what we'll do there. So now it just looks like it's floating, and it looks like there's just random debris floating in the air. And how we can fix that is by going to Filter. Let's see here. We'll grab our image there, go to Filter, Blur Gallery, and then we can go to Path Blur. What Path Blur does is it actually gives us control points here to create and manipulate motion in our effects. So you can see that we have this Bezier type spline here, and the more that we drag this around, decrease the endpoint speed here a little bit, and then decrease the speed some, you can see what's happening here is that whatever direction we actually put this blur in is going to give us, some kind of motion up to that point. And something that's really cool about this is that you can actually create multiple paths and even multiple points, so that you see if I hover over here with the mouse, you see the little plus icon. If I just click and I drag on that point, I can add a little bit more to that. And now if we turn off the centered blur, that's going to give us a little bit more realistic, type of motion to it. Like it's not all going to be blurred directly, say from the center of the image. And so you just, can pull these points around. If you press the Alt or Option key, you can click and actually make these like linear curves. So you can see how now these particles just kind of go up to the left here and then a hard right. So we actually don't need that here, because what I'd like to do is see if we can get a little bit more of like just a forced motion, maybe up. So I don't know, maybe the particles are just reacting to the energy that's going on here in the scene. Another cool trick that you can use with these type of blurs, with the path blur, is you can actually create multiple paths. So if you just click and drag, it'll create your 2 points, and where you release is actually going to be, you see the little arrow here, so it means that it's going to be moving in that direction. And so what you can do is this is actually going to take, if you can see that here, let's try to zoom in a little bit. So all of these particles on the left side here are moving a little bit more along the lines with the left side path, and then the right side particles are moving with right path. And so what we can do there is we can actually create some pretty sweet effects if we just, you know, pull these and work these around just a little bit. So we'll actually take the speed up. We'll turn our endpoint speed down a little bit. What we're really wanting is just a little bit of blur. I actually don't want anything too crazy. I just don't want them, you know, say looking like static particles. So what we'll do here is actually just select this left path, and we can delete these because we don't need those. And see if we can create just a little bit of movement. Endpoint speed, we can take that down a little bit. Now we'll take our speed up. Just trying to move in fairly small increments here, so we're not actually getting too much motion. Sure, and that works for me, so okay. Rendering out the smart filter can really take quite a toll on your system, and there are times that things don't work quite as fast as others, and I have a method that I use for that to speed that up a little bit. I'll create a separate tutorial on that later. I think that's a little bit more of a tutorial here than just, you know, say this workshop style ramble session. And so we're just going to grab this. We're going to move this up. Okay, so what we're getting here, guys, is if you see the way, like, my layer mask is actually moving along with my overlay here when I'm trying to transform it. So I'll just press escape to undo that. And if there's ever a time where you actually like the layer mask that you have, especially when it's specific like this, there is this little link button right between your layer mask and your layer thumbnail. If you click that, that will unlock or unlink your layer mask to your image so that you can transform that image independently now, and you don't have to worry about layer mask being adjusted as well. So you'll see here once this is done transforming, that our layer mask is still intact, but our particles are actually moved quite a bit. So what I wanted to see here is if I made it bigger, but what I think happened, because they are so small, I think that when I made it bigger, I actually kind of ruined that effect. So we'll just Controller Command Z to undo, Controller Command T to transform that again, and I think what I want is just to bring these down even and make this quite a bit smaller, and then I will press Alt or Option and Shift and then bring this out here to spread those out a little ways. Press Enter to commit to that transform, and then we'll see here how this works. I think that works a little bit better for us. So we'll just duplicate this image and move this up a little bit here. And then inside of that layer mask, we'll just grab a black brush and we'll paint right out of the bottom here so that we can keep some of these particles, but not have too much going on that it's really a distraction. Do the same thing, we can take off some from the top. Maybe take some of this away from like directly behind them. So that works. I think what we should do when I'm looking at this, what I don't like is that I see, if you look at the background here, you can see that there's quite a bit, you know, of say just the browns and the yellows that are coming from the background. So we'll see if we can just go above that base layer there and create a photo filter adjustment layer. And we can just set that to say cooling. It's at 80. Let's kind of flip through these here and see what works the best. I actually think the first one worked better, and then we can just increase the density of that to see what happens. You don't want to go all the way in most cases. Yeah, I think that works there a little bit. So all it's doing is it's just helping cool down the image some, just from the background standpoint there, so that it's not too crazy. And I think we do actually want to hide the vehicle a little bit more, and what we'll do for that is just head into this background, this atmospheric smoke layer. I will go grab my smoke brush again with that layer mask selected. And then with a white brush, we'll just do a little bit more painting on top of this vehicle. It hides it a little bit better. We can do a little bit more here towards the feet. Kind of really helps just give them a little bit more of a punch, and focal point on their face there. Really don't like the way that this reflection overlay is working. So we'll just kind of knock the opacity on that down so that it's there. Might just take that out later, who knows. So I think we should just add maybe to this atmospheric layer. If we just press we'll do Control or Command U. I don't want to go into curves because that can be a little bit too nitpicky. But what we'll do is we'll grab and just kind of add like a blue hue to this scene here. To the smoke. It's just adding a blue hue to that smoke overlay. And so I think that can help us out quite a bit here. I don't want to overdo this. But if I click OK, I have a Smart Filters layer mask here. So what I can do is I can just grab a black brush and I can paint some of those effects out, in different areas around the image, maybe if I just want a little bit more of a breakup, in the hues there. So as I said before, when we were doing these paint overs here, I do want to have a little bit more of, a little bit more detail, maybe some foreground detail. I don't think we need too much background, but we'll just move into the smoked out kit and we can actually go, I really like that depth of field smoke. Let's try Atmos 2. So what this has in here is some really cool atmospheric layers for all different types of details. So I'm looking to see if there's anything that can be more immediate, that has some like very nice stringy style details to them. And I think that there may be some here. So just kind of browse these for a minute. So I actually really like this image. And so if I full screen that, you can kind of see here how this has a bunch of different details in it. So what I'm hoping to do is be able to pull some of those details out without much of a hassle. And so we'll do this all directly under the effects layer or the effects group. And so I'll pull that in. As soon as I'll get it in, I'll just place it, and then we'll press Command or Control M to bring up our curves. And now what I'm looking for is just to see if we can pop this enough to get rid of a lot of the larger details, but keep the smaller details. So things that might be a little bit, say more stringy, kind of like this is here. Press OK, and we can actually, if you alt click on a, say, smart object that has smart filters on it with these two circles here with this icon, if you alter option and click that and then drag that up to another smart object, what that'll do is it'll just bring those up and add that that smart filter that you have there up to whatever other smart object you have. So you can see here that added a blue hue to the smoke. And so we'll actually double click the hue saturation smart filter there, and we'll just bring that to a little bit more of a blue to say match what we have going on in the lightning. We can set that directly to screen there. And now what we want to do is just scale this entire image down a ways, because we really want this to be focused a little bit more around them without having too many large details from that effect. So let's see if we can do that here. And so at this point, let's create, well, alt-click, alter option, and click the layer mask to bring up a black mask. We can select our semi-hard brush, set it to white, and then move to, say, 100% opacity. And then we can just paint in certain areas here like we did before to really make those smoke effects kind of pop out. And so now wherever we paint here, just being careful of these edges, wherever we paint, that is going to show up. So I think that works. We can actually use another adjustment. See if we can find another overlay that's fairly close to what we're looking for that can maybe engulf them a little bit. I like this one here. So I like the circular nature of this one. I'm not sure if we can play with that at all, but we will bring that in on top of this layer. Just go ahead and place that, and then we can just alt-click the layer effects there, and we can bring those smart filters straight up to this other layer. Set that to screen. Scale that down a little bit. And I'm hoping that we can actually sort of make this work in this type of fashion here to where it's almost going right around them. So click enter to place that. Don't know how well this will work. Let's see. So we'll press Control or Command L to go into our levels. See if we can crunch these down a little bit more than what they are. Because those whites are quite hot in there. Bring the blacks up just a little bit. All right, so we will just alter option, click, create a layer mask, and see if we can, paint some of these effects right in. Keeping in mind, I really don't like that one there. Maybe this wasn't a good effect. No, that's not a good one. Okay, we'll just get rid of that. Bad idea. It happens. I really try not to focus too much on certain small details like that if I don't really need to. It gets really easy to waste a whole lot of time doing things that might not even affect the overall image that much. So what we're going to do now is focus a little bit more on bringing some type of a foreground, say blurred smoke, into this foreground just to kind of give it a little bit more depth. And so what we're looking for is maybe something similar to this that has, a depth of field to it. We have a couple here that might work. Let's see. I know that some of these are actually, I don't know if something like this would work because there's really not much detail there at all. But what they might be able to do, and we can kind of see that effect here already without even doing anything to it. We'll just drag these effects up there. and set this to screen. Yeah, it's kind of what I thought. So you can actually barely see any, any real detail coming from that, except for, say, just this top right corner, which I'm not really too impressed with. So we can get rid of that one. And I do know that I have some, let's see here, and go back to smoked out, depth of field smoke. And this is kind of what this kit here is based off of, is having much more of a shallow depth of field and giving us just small details to work with. So we'll grab this layer here and kind of see what that does. Alter option, throw the smart filters on it, turn off the curves there. Actually, the curves will work fine if we just edit those curves and kind of maybe create something that we want. Maybe something like that. We just go to screen. See what happens if we just kind of drop the overall exposure of this down a little bit. I don't like it. Nope. So we won't do that. This is kind of the fun part about creating these, these type of images. I mean, sometimes it can take, quite a while to go through. But there are times like this where, I have the time to just sort of play around with it. And I'm sorry if you guys get bored, but this is the process. So right now I'm just looking for any kind of, say, lens flare effect or anything like that I might be able to just throw in more of a subtle manner and create cool effects with. And so I'm just throwing these in here, and we'll just place that. And I will take my hue saturation from that base layer, just kind of mimic this blue a little bit. The color should be there, I just need to saturate it some now. I'm gonna set this blend mode to screen. I don't know if this will even do anything. Maybe I'm thinking about it too much. So we'll create a curves, Control or Command M. We'll drop that down a little bit. So what I'm doing is seeing how I can get rid of some of these effects there. But I really don't think we need to. Even just for a base image like this, there's not really a whole lot that needs to go into it. So what I'll do here, I think we're going to just do a little bit more dodging and burning on them to maybe pull some more light into these areas that we need it. And then we'll see where we sit from that point. So to do this dodging and burning that we'll be doing, I'll just go all the way down to my base layer here where they are at. And if you guys haven't heard about this Ultimate Retouch panel, it's actually something that I really enjoy. This is probably hands down the most used panel or action panel that I've had to date. I've had a lot, say the Retouching Academy panels, didn't really care for them too much. And I really wanted something like this that just integrates well with Photoshop's interface and isn't branded to hell and just, it's not an eyesore in my layout. And so what we have here in this Ultimate Retouch panel is just, you have a ton, I think, somewhere upwards of, say, 200 different actions and operations that are built into this button style system here. And so it really helps, give you just quick access to certain things that you might use all the time, like frequency separation that we're not using in this specific tutorial or workshop. But what I do use all the time in almost every image is dodge and burn. And so, they have multiple methods here. They have soft light, screen to multiply, overlay, and curves. And what I typically like to use is curves. And so I'll just click that button there for the action. And so what that does is it just creates a dodge and burn curves group with dodge and a burn layer. And then you can see that, say for dodge, for this one here, I'll actually bring this up a little bit because I know that I want the exposure higher. But for dodge, it will just, increase the exposure in the image. And then for burn, it'll darken the exposure here. And these are already set to having black layer masks. So all you have to really do is just grab a brush with white as your foreground color and then begin painting where you want these effects to happen. So I'll just take this here and not unburn, we'll start with dodge. And then I'll just start painting little bits of exposure. If we go ahead and press 3 on our keyboard to set our brush to 30% opacity, and then I'll just softly, paint certain areas here that I think, may be able to get just a little bit brighter. And that'll especially happen here on his arm, so that we can paint some of that light in there. And have a look. We can go down to dodge and we can just kind of dodge them entirely. Or sorry, burn, not dodge, but we can just sort of burn them. And what I like to do is I like to start with broad strokes first, and then just kind of work my way around the image. Doing things like this in an image like this isn't really like a retouching type of dodge and burn. This is something that's just very broad stroked, and sometimes I may do a little bit more contouring, but this isn't really the kind of image that I think demands that. So we'll place a little bit of emphasis here on this shadow going down. Really helps to kind of slim her face just a little bit. Same thing here, crease a little bit, but it doesn't really need to be too much, because that would be quite a bright light source. So at this point, what I'll do is I will head back up to my effects group. We'll just right click and give this a label or a color here. And we'll just say orange for effects, all the fire. And we can just create, let's see here. I wonder if I can just steal one of these overlays and just pull that down onto the face. Sure, so this lightning image here, or this lightning group, what we'll do is we'll just duplicate that here a moment. Controller Command T. It's going to make that much smaller. And see if we can get somewhat of a realistic reflection. I way overthought this. I should have just painted that in there. Don't be like me, guys. I mean, well, you can be like me, but don't. It's very easy to get caught up in things like this that I'm almost doing the hard way. But what we'll do is we'll just create Alt or Option, click a layer mask to make a black layer mask. Our brush tool, set the foreground color to white, opacity to 100%, and we can just paint that right into his glasses here. Just note to self, guys, if you get something like this, I could have just squiggled a white brush, but this actually works well enough, so I'm not gonna cry too much about it. But it can be a lot easier than that. So I'm just going to see how far I can push this here and accentuating these highlights. Grab a black brush to maybe crunch this edge down so they don't look so rounded. And get a little bit over on this side. Sure, and that works. So what I really want to have from this point here is a little bit more detail on them. So what I'll do is I'm just going to use a selective sharpening method. And I think for this image, we can just use high pass. High pass doesn't need to be too crazy or insane. Let's create both of our sharpening layers that we'll be using for this. To get that started, we'll just head up to the top of our stack of layers here and Control Alt Shift and E, or Command Option Shift and E. And that will just create, I call it a postage stamp. I'm not sure what that's actually called in Photoshop, but we're just merging all visible layers into a new layer there. And we will right click and convert to Smart Object. And then at this point here, what we can do is we can just go to Filter, Other, and then High Pass. And we can see what's going on here is that we're essentially going to just be using this with, say, a screen and soft light blend mode. But at 3.2 here, this is really going to capture, maybe a lot of the larger details that's going on. And that's primarily because this scene so far, it's a very wide scene. In the sense that they're quite small in the image. And so if we bring this down a ways and say just want to sharpen, more of the fine details first, we can just drop this radius here until we're primarily seeing a lot of the smaller details in the scene that we want to work with. So we can just click OK here. And we will set this first layer to soft light. And then we can say hide that, Control or Command J to duplicate that layer. So this is more of the fine detail. We can just call that fine. And then the second layer we'll call large. And we can turn that one on and make that visible. Looks like that fine detail layer isn't doing too much, but I think that's fine. It's working okay. And so what we'll do with the large one here is we'll go back into the high pass. Sorry, let's set that to overlay first. And then we can head right into the high pass again by double clicking the smart filter there. We can just bring these details up. And if I back up, what you can see that this is doing is that it's adding an overall sharpening effect to the image. And what we don't want to do is get very high with this, because what that's going to do is it's going to start, burning out just the color and the pixels there, just with the nature of overlay. And so we'll try to keep this as fairly minimal as possible, while still getting the nice fall offs and things like that I think we may want in this scene. So let's go back to about 7. Sure, 8.2, that works. And so with the high pass, you do want to be careful at times, because you can start to introduce a lot of different halos and things like that. We'll cover that in further detail in a different tutorial that's more specifically based around that. But what I'll do for both of these layers here is I will just Alt or Option click a layer mask. And then this one here, I can just option and then drag the layer masks down here to the other layer. So just holding option will replace a layer mask if you want to, copy or replace a layer mask if you want to bring that to a different layer. And so we'll just start off with a white brush at 100%. And we can just paint this fine detail layer where we want that. And because this is not a close-up portrait, it's not going to have the same effect as it might on other images. And on this one here, I'm not so worried about any of the grain because I'm actually just probably going to add a lot of grain to this later on. And so really just any of these details that are more immediate, we can just go through and sharpen these up nicely. Let's see if there's anywhere else, maybe the hands. In this case, I might just kind of scribble paint all over them and just kind of sharpen them up entirely. And then we can turn on the other layer here, select the other layer mask for the large details, and then we can start to paint that in. And you can see what's happening is it's almost just dodging and burning and adding detail. But we do really want to be careful because you can get some weird halos, like in this area here, especially parts of the image that are a high contrast. You can see that when I start to paint that in there, it gives this really weird, say, black halo that's happening around the hammer. And so I typically want to stay as far away from those edges as possible. I don't mind some of the halo detail or, say gritty details that might happen in other areas. But a little bit more specifically, just in that one area, we'll stay away from the outer edges. And it's the same thing here. If you see when I paint around him, these higher contrast areas start to get a little bit crunchy. And so we'll just try to stay inside the body here. And this is creating a little bit more of, say, like a dodge and burn effect without having to go in and do this all completely manually. So it's just helping some of those larger details pop. I don't know if you guys can hear my wife up there. Ooh, the kids are getting at her. It's interesting. Parent life. All right, so I think that this actually works pretty well. Maybe with this larger detail brush, we'll see if you can see how we can pull just a little bit more detail into some of these areas that are, working around here in the image. And since that's set to, an overlay blend mode, it'll actually work to add, certain little pops of detail, to areas that maybe we want a slight bit more contrast in. You don't really want to overdo it too far because it can be very easy to get out of hand. I feel like we turned a layer on here somewhere. Let's see. Oh, this gradient came back. So if you press F4, I don't know what that does, but it looks like it brings back a layer that we had previously. I'll have to look that up. I actually have my settings for OBS here set to F4 to stop a recording. And so then it just randomly creates this layer. So I will have to figure that out and find out what hotkey that is. So I'll just delete this gradient layer. But at this point, guys, I think that we're good to move into the color grading and cropping and maybe the final touches that I like to do inside of Lightroom. And so I will just save this here and meet you guys in Lightroom to finish this up. All right, guys, so that wraps up part 2 in this process. Another long video. If you guys are still here and breathing, just leave a comment that you're alive. I just want to make sure that I haven't killed you from boredom. But I hope that this video brought you guys some value and gave you some insight into maybe what my brain's thinking or creatively troubleshooting, whatever you want to call it. In the next video, we're going to be covering the color grading process in Lightroom and how I work on most of my images to finalize them once I get to that step. And I'm looking forward to giving you guys a little bit of insight there. So I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks for being here, folks.